Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Gwei Refuel, where I recap the latest news in the Ethereum ecosystem. I'm your host, Anthony Sassano, and today's the 3rd of March 2021. Alright everyone, let's get into the news from the last 24 hours. So, actually, I posted this tweet just a couple of hours ago. Basically, I was looking at some on-chain metrics around Ethereum because I'm getting ready for this month's kind of Ethereum data pump episode where I go through the different on-chain analytics for Ethereum and DeFi and all that. So, I mean, subscribe to the channel if you don't want to miss that. That'll be out this weekend. But basically, what this chart shows, and it's called the Ethereum HODL Waves Chart, and what it shows is it basically shows like when was the last time ETH was moved on chain. Now, the reason I highlighted this is because 20% of the total ETH supply has not moved on chain over 3 years. And you can see on the chart here on the left-hand side, it'll give you percentages per kind of like time frame. So between 3 and 5 years, 16% hasn't moved. And then 5 years and more, 4% of the total supply hasn't moved in over 5 years, which is pretty interesting, right? Because the Ethereum network came out in 2015, and that 5-year metric only came into existence last year, because before then we only had up to under 5 years. So it's really interesting to see that 4% of the total supply, which would be about maybe I think 3.5 million ETH, has not moved in over 5 years, which at this point I would consider was probably never going to move, right? I mean, if you haven't moved it since Genesis, you've either kind of lost the keys, or you're not interested in it, you forgot about it, right? Maybe someone does come ahead and move it one day, and we'll know more and more. Like if it gets to like the 7-year range, where we'll see like if there's been any coins not moved in 7 years or more as well. So that's going to be interesting to watch. And you can look at the other time frames here. I would consider anything that has been active within the last, I guess, 6 months to be the active supply of ETH. Right, anything after that seems to be holder supply, because if you haven't kind of moved your ETH on chain in 6 months, it's fair to say that you're a holder, right? I think that makes sense. Or maybe your ETH is in like a Uniswap pool or whatever, and it's just like trading there. That's still, I mean, it's not holding, but it's still different to just outright kind of moving it to sell it, sort of thing. And I would say that in terms of like actively traded supply, it's probably like I guess like a month or less, and that metric is about 19%, I think, or almost 20%, which is like the actively kind of traded supply here. And then after that, yeah, you can see the breakdown here on this chart, which I thought was really cool here. But you can go check out this chart for yourself. If you don't have a paid account, it'll only show you data up to 1 year ago, I think. There's a paid version of this kind of tool that you can get, and so it's on Glassnode. The link's down here. It'll be in the YouTube description. But basically, it'll let you see like the most kind of up-to-date data here. So yeah, that's really cool to see. I think obviously it's bullish when coins haven't moved in a long time, right? It means they're part of like the holder base, or at least they're part of like exchange cold storage as well, which counts for a lot. And it's funny, if you actually go here, you can look at the Bitcoin HODL waves as well. And obviously Bitcoin's been out longer than Ethereum. So, it has like a 10-year metric, I'm pretty sure, if it wants to load up here, where it'll show you, coins that haven't moved in like over 10 years. And it's actually crazy. Over 10% of the BTC supply hasn't moved in over 10 years on chain. And I think a lot of this is the original kind of supply that Satoshi mined that is attributed to him, or them. But then we break it down more, and you can see that over 7 years hasn't moved. 7.6% of the supply hasn't moved in over 7 years, which means these are long-term holders, right? That's not Satoshi anymore, at least most of it, I think. And then over between 5 and 7 years, 4% of the supply hasn't moved. So obviously, as we keep aging, and Ethereum keeps aging, we're going to go into these brackets as well. But I don't think there's going to be a period of time, at least not for a very long time, where 10% of the ETH supply hasn't moved on chain in over 10 years, right? That's going to take a while for us to get there, if we ever get there. I think Bitcoin's a unique case because obviously Bitcoin was the first, right? Back then, 10 years ago, it was worth like basically nothing. So no one really cared. And a lot of the original supply was mined. The first supply was mined by Satoshi and a bunch of other early miners like Hal Finney, who's actually passed away a few years ago. So maybe, he had cold storage coins that he kind of like put under a time lock or something for his family, or maybe he lost the keys to his coins. We don't know. But that's actually very impressive that over 10% of the supply hasn't been moved in 10 years. And that's of the total supply, so the total kind of like, I guess you could say 21 million coins, so it'd be about over 2 million coins just hasn't been moved. I'm not actually certain if that's the total supply or if it's the circulating supply. I think it's probably the circulating supply because it's measuring stuff that hasn't moved. So if we take the circulating supply to be, I think 16.5 or something million for Bitcoin, I haven't checked in a while, and 10% of that, we get like 1.6 million, right? And Satoshi was thought to have like 1 million coins. So there's another 600,000 there that, you know, might just belong to people that forgot their keys, right? A lot of people in the early days didn't really care because it was worthless. So yeah, very interesting there. But I'm very curious to see how the Ethereum HODL waves evolve over time here. So there's been a lot of talk about, obviously, miners threatening to fork the network over EIP 1559. I'm not going to rehash that whole debate, but that's been discussed a lot lately, right? And Arthur0x on Twitter here reshared a piece from Hasib that he wrote. I mean, Hasib wrote this piece a while ago. I remember reading it in October of 2019 or November of 2019, where he says, Ethereum is now unforkable thanks to DeFi. Now, this is a kind of a little bit of a lengthy piece here. I'll link it in the description. You can go give it a read. But basically what it goes and runs through is that we now have such a rich ecosystem of apps on Ethereum that in order to fork Ethereum and have your like fork survive more than kind of just like limp along, you'd have to get these apps to come with you, right? Because say you fork Ethereum right now and you have all the apps on there, it doesn't matter, right? The community doesn't come with you. The ecosystem doesn't come with you. The apps can actually be, shut down in an emergency shutdown way. So for Maker, for example, it can actually be completely shut down by its governance system, and then that shuts down DAI, which shuts down kind of the rest of the, I guess, most of like the activity and the apps on DeFi in general. So because of DeFi, it's very hard to fork Ethereum and have a successful fork. So that's why I think that if for some reason some miners band together and fork off of 1559 and try to get their own fork to survive, there's like a pretty much a 0% chance that that's going anywhere, right? Like probably like maybe one app out of all the apps on Ethereum might follow that for some reason, right? But almost all the apps have said that they are for 1559, or they haven't said anything yet. They haven't said for or against. So the biggest apps seem to be for it. So I think that's what matters a lot. But it's cool to see that these pieces were being written back in 2019 and they're kind of playing out now in 2021, right? Because Ethereum has never really had a contentious fork besides the DAO, right? The DAO is a bit of a different situation because it wasn't a planned thing, right? Whereas, Bitcoin has had a thing in 2017, for those who don't know, where there was like a big part of the Bitcoin community at the time that wanted to increase the block size, right? They wanted to go from 1 megabyte to 2 megabyte, and they didn't want SegWit, which was implemented on the Bitcoin network in the end. But what ended up happening, and right up until like I think a few days before the fork, I think it was August 1st of 2017 that the fork happened. A lot of the hash power, a big part of the ecosystem was signaling that they were going to just follow the 2 megabyte kind of fork, and they wouldn't have SegWit, and then that would be Bitcoin. But then, a few days before, I think like Roger Ver and a few of the other big players basically said, okay, well, we're not going to fork Bitcoin and use Bitcoin. We're not going to like make kind of like the chain that we fork off be kind of like Bitcoin. We're just going to fork off and call like our thing Bitcoin Cash. We're going to have bigger blocks and, no SegWit, all this sort of stuff. So that ended up happening, and that was extremely contentious at the time. For those of you who were there, you would know what I mean. But like there was hash wars going on where miners were changing chains, right? And the price was going nuts, like Bitcoin Cash, like, I don't think I think it like went up so quickly and Bitcoin went down so quickly that, it didn't flip, but like it was getting close. I remember seeing all the money fly out of Bitcoin. Like it was surreal. You see all the Bitcoin being sold and all the Bitcoin Cash being bought up because there was, for a short period of time, a very real uncertainty in the market about what was actually going to be the real Bitcoin. Now, obviously, the rest is history. Bitcoin Cash kind of lost. Bitcoin is Bitcoin. So I don't think that's going to happen here with the 1559, potential fork. As I've said many times, I don't think there's actually going to be much of a fork from this. But and I think that's in large part due to the ecosystem on top of Ethereum, right? The application ecosystem, DeFi specifically. So yeah, that's something to think about, and definitely a piece to read here. I highly recommend reading it. I remember reading it back in 2019 and thought it was really great. And for those who don't know Hasib, he works at one of the VC funds, Dragonfly Capital, and he basically is pretty deep in the DeFi kind of weeds and has been for a while, as you can see here. But Yeah, I think it's a good thing to kind of keep your mind on, because I've seen people and they've messaged me being like, I don't understand how, the Ethereum governance process works. I saw this chart that like miners are against 1559, they've signaled that they're against it. Does this mean it's not going to happen? And, I obviously I can forgive people for not following along with Ethereum governance. It's definitely messy. It's definitely something that you have to, pay keen attention to if you want to follow along with it. But at the end of the day, and as I've explained many, many times right on the Refuel, miners do not have power. Like, they have very, very little power. And the game theory of proof of work ensures that the miners are just going to go where the ecosystem goes at the end of the day. And, there are some bigger players than others. I would say that some of the major DeFi apps like Maker, Compound, Aave, control a lot of the vote, right? Not every voice is created equal. That's just how it is. That's just reality of it. So that, and then exchanges also hold a big card here, right? If the exchange says that, this is the ticker of ETH for this Ethereum blockchain, well, I mean, that right there is another kind of, I guess, like a massive signal, right? And then especially the core devs being like, well, we're going to maintain this chain, we're going to work on this chain, this is going to be Ethereum. That's another one, right? And then, the community just reinforces those views and kind of like helps to inform them as well around that. So governance is super messy. I wrote a bit more about governance in the Daily Gwei newsletter today, actually, if you want to check that out. But yeah, governance is super messy. We're not going to figure it out. You can't solve governance. But what you can do is you can basically have kind of like assurances that, a particular group can't exert their will on another group. And I don't think miners can exert their will on the rest of the community in Ethereum. I just don't think that's going to happen. And I can't wait till we have 1559 in what's looking like July at this stage, where we can finally kind of like show people that miners just do not have power here. But what I'm very curious to see is what kind of like, screw around the miners potentially do when we do the ETH1 to ETH2 merge, right? Because if they're scared about a 30% pay cut due to 1559, then what are they going to do about a 100% pay cut when we do the merge, right? And I don't think they can do anything that's like, that's going to impact the chain or in a kind of like bad way or in a lasting way. Worst case scenario, they attack the chain. We just kind of like merge before the attack onto ETH2, and that's it, right? The miners are gone. I do think that the miners being profit maximalists are just going to mine the chain right up until the merge, and then everyone's going to move over. That chain will probably be kind of like kept alive by some miners as part of like an opportunistic thing, which is fine, right? Free forked ETH for all of us to kind of like trade for more ETH, whatever. I think that's definitely going to happen. But again, the power lies in the community, the apps, all the different stakeholders, the node runners, of course, people who run nodes and decide where to point their nodes. That's critically important too. It doesn't rely in kind of like just the miners, right? And I actually much prefer the fact that we're going to proof of stake, because I think proof of stake actually aligns incentives better between the people who are validating the network and securing the network and the people who are using the network. Because I never mind, right? But I'm a user of Ethereum and I'm staking now, right? A lot of miners actually haven't used Ethereum before. And there's been like lots of talk about this where a lot of miners don't even, they don't run their own nodes. They don't even have MetaMask installed. They literally just mine the coins and they dump it, right? They just dump ETH. Now, that's obviously not a really great thing to have when you want to have everyone aligned. So a lot of the stakers right now on the ETH2 chain are people in the ecosystem that have been in here for a while, stacking ETH, using DeFi. Like, isn't that just a much better kind of stakeholder group to have than miners who are kind of like just not in it for the same reasons? And I'm not saying this applies to all miners, but I mean, so many of the ones that I've seen are just like not very aligned, right? And I think, from the mining pools, kind of like signaling this stuff with their hash rate against 1559 because they're going to take a little bit of a pay cut. I mean, that to me is just like bullshit, because 1559, the reason we want it is because it's a massive improvement to the Ethereum gas kind of mechanism, gas fee market, kind of like that way we do fees, not just because of the fee burning. So yeah, I know I've gone on a lot about this lately, but I think it is critically important to understand how governance works in Ethereum and which parties have power and which don't. Because at the end of the day, as I said, there are some parties that have more power than others, and there are some parties that don't have any power but think they do, and I think that's miners. And not to say that miners can't do anything if they all banded together, maybe they could, but at the end of the day, the game theory exists to basically say, you're going to mine the chain because it's profitable for you to do so. If you band together and try and attack the chain, you have to be sure that all the other miners are going to, stick to the kind of like plan that you made, right? So it becomes a kind of like, I guess, for those of you who have seen the movie Reservoir Dogs, right? It becomes a game like that, where it's kind of like, you're trusting this person, and then this person is trusting this person is doing this, and you don't really know, right? And it's all this trust, and then eventually everyone just kind of like defects, right? And does what makes sense for them. And what makes sense for miners is always to mine the most profitable chain. Miners are not a charity. They need to cover their costs. They can't just mine a chain at a loss because they're just obviously losing money and they can't cover their costs. So yeah, anyway, digress there. I think I went on enough about that for now. So Balaji put out this really interesting tweet just before, where he said, books are being banned, but on-chain books will unban them, because on-chain books are going to be NFTs. I've spoken about how NFTs are going to go far beyond, art pieces and in-game items and stuff like that. And he basically lists the benefits here of kind of like tokenizing, books, right? Making NFTs out of them. You can have crypto native payments. You can have transparent royalties where the NFT, right, of the book, every time it's sold, 10% of that proceeds goes to the original author, right? You can have, your keys in your wallet, so you control the thing in your own kind of crypto wallet. So not your keys, not your books, right? Digitally signed special editions, right? Which is really cool because it'll come from the person because they've signed it with their Ethereum address or their ENS or whatever. No region locks, totally global, right? For everyone to use. No server-side censorship because it's on Ethereum, it's decentralized. And fully machine readable, translatable, and annotatable because it's digital first. This is the things, these are the things that I think haven't come to the forefront yet because of one of the major issues being scalability, being the fact that NFTs weren't really as popular until recently, that are going to change everything about certain industries, right? For anyone who knows about the book industry, the publishing industry, it's freaking bad. It's really bad, especially, college textbooks, right? We call it university in Australia, but, for the US, college textbooks are extremely expensive, right? And they're just always required for different classes. And, the resellers don't kind of pay royalties to the original publishers and stuff like that. So it's just a complete mess. And there's just IP law comes into it, copyright law. There's so much mess on it, and it's just really, really, really bad. Now, this can help with that. This can revolutionize that industry. It's obviously not a very flashy industry, right? It's kind of boring for college textbooks, but where it does become flashy is when novelists start doing this. When novelists basically, skip right past publishers and just, self-publish on Ethereum, I think that's going to start a movement in of itself. Now, not to say that publishers don't have their role to play, right? They obviously act as ways to get your kind of work out there through distribution channels and kind of marketing and all that sort of stuff. But there are a lot of people who self-publish, but they usually do it on Amazon. Now, imagine being able to do it on Ethereum in a fully digital way and still have your physical books, through Amazon or whatever, right? But be able to kind of offer all these benefits. And I think we're going to see that because we're already seeing that with artists coming into the space to do their NFTs and stuff like that. So I think we're going to see that with books as well, which is going to be really cool to see play out. So SuperRare published this blog post about something that has been talked about in the NFT community lately. Now, as I've said before, NFTs are bringing in a host of new people into crypto, right? These are not crypto natives. These are artists, musicians, people who, collect game items, all this sort of stuff. They're coming into this space and they have a very different view of this sort of stuff. And they are not like us crypto natives, and they don't particularly understand the underlying technology. So what ended up happening over the past few days is that there's this narrative that formed around NFTs actually actively harming the planet, right? And what this blog post aims to do from SuperRare, which is actually a very good blog post, I highly recommend going and reading it, it aims to explain how the Ethereum network works and how issuing NFTs on Ethereum does not increase the carbon footprint of Ethereum. And the TLDR is basically that, plus what increases the carbon footprint of Ethereum is when the ETH price goes up and more miners come online, right? I know at this point I sound like a broken record with how much I talk about miners, but that's the point, right? The Ethereum network hash power grows with the price of ETH. That's just how it always is, right? Hash rate follows price. Now, and they also, they go through this basically, and they go through this in a detailed way, but not too technical, which I thought was really cool. And then they basically mentioned that if the Ethereum community is working on going to proof of stake, which I really like, because this is one of the major reasons we are moving to proof of stake, because the Ethereum community as a whole, not everyone, but most people, from what I've seen, consider proof of work to be incredibly wasteful and incredibly harmful for the planet. Now, whether that's, true or not, I mean, there's discussions and debates for and against. I'm not going to debate my point here. I don't have a strong opinion either way, if I'm being honest, but I like proof of stake for different reasons over proof of work. But I think as we kind of get into more mainstream consciousness, there are a lot of people who are very, very environmentally conscious, right? They don't want to increase their carbon footprint if they can avoid it. Now, and on top of that, we're also going to have governments, right, questioning this stuff, being like, well, this proof of work thing is very wasteful, right? Bitcoin's using potentially up to 1% of the global energy use to produce this thing and whatever, right? I know, as I said, there's arguments for and against, but I think Ethereum moving to proof of stake very soon, when the merge happens, is going to be very, very beneficial for its network, because we'll be kind of immune from those attacks from governments. And any immunity that we can have from governments is going to be very important, because we're obviously going, and creating products that governments aren't necessarily going to be okay with. And if we can get their attention, away from Ethereum in any way possible, I think that's a net positive, right? And let Bitcoin deal with that, because I kind of view Bitcoin as like a shield for Ethereum, because, every kind of regulator and government seems to be just focused on Bitcoin, right? And they kind of like focus on Bitcoin from, the coin itself, and then from the network and the energy use. So while that's happening, we can just, quietly in the background do all our stuff, and then obviously merge into proof of stake, and it's going to be all good there. But I think artists in particular are very conscious of their carbon footprint from what I've noticed. And, it's kind of abhorrent to them to see that, these networks are using so much carbon emissions just to do something that they don't necessarily have to do. Proof of stake does work. It does have some of its trade-offs, right, where proof of work has some advantages, but the argument goes that, the trade-off of not wasting, or at least not using all of this kind of, massive amounts of electricity for kind of, I guess, like, I'm not going to get too technical here, but maybe a little bit less security is worth it, right? So yeah, I thought that was a very important post from SuperRare here, and glad to see that they're actually, they know what they're talking about. Sometimes I view blog posts from different companies, and I'm like, this doesn't make any sense, right? And SuperRare definitely knows what they're talking about. So go give this a read. I thought it was very interesting. So 0x Rafi on Twitter today put out this amazing thread on optimism and optimistic rollups. It's a 25 long tweet thread here. I'm not going to read it out. Obviously, you can go check it out. But it basically breaks down how, what optimism is, what optimistic rollups are, how they work, how they, how much throughput they provide. I mean, there was a really, really awesome tweet down here somewhere, I think, where he basically said that, where is it? Yeah, to put all the figures in context, Synthetics tests reported decreases in gas costs of up to 143 times and transaction confirmation times as low as 200 milliseconds, while Uniswap tests reported decreases in gas costs of up to 100 times and transaction confirmation times of 169 milliseconds. So that is just like a massive scalability gain there, right? So yeah, I definitely recommend going and reading this thread if you want to get a deeper dive on this from a technical perspective. And it's not a long read here, and it doesn't go too technical. It'll just get you up to speed on why everyone's excited about this technology. There was one tweet that it got a bit of heat for, which was this one about the differences between side chains and layer 2 solutions. And I think I've maybe misrepresented this in the past as well, where I've said, and disclaimer here, I'm an advisor to Polygon, which was previously known as Matic. I've said that Polygon is a side chain. Now, I mean, this isn't like totally true. And Mihailo from the one of the co-founders of Polygon kind of corrected this and said that Polygon is obviously not a side chain only solution, which it isn't, because Polygon chain has an ecosystem of different layer 2 things that they're developing. But the currently deployed stuff, the Matic network, right, the Matic POS network or the Polygon POS network, is a production-ready Plasma implementation with their sidechain, which uses Ethereum for commits and staking slashing. So I've spoken about on the refill before about how sidechains can essentially checkpoint themselves to Ethereum to inherit Ethereum security. So if something was to go wrong on the sidechain, right, if say all the validators were malicious and like, you know, destroyed the sidechain or like did something funky on there, you could just roll it back to the committed kind of state on Ethereum, right? And as he says here, there's also staking, slashing of kind of like along with that too. So you can actually slash the validators for doing something wrong using Ethereum too. Not Ethereum too, Ethereum as well. So yeah, it's very important to kind of realize that. And I think that it's getting a little bit harder to kind of break down what's a sidechain, what's a layer 2, you know, what's good, what sidechain is bad, all this sort of stuff, right? I think the term sidechain is just shit, like straight up. It's just a bad term because I've used it before to describe, you know, everything can be a sidechain, right? You know, centralized exchanges can be a sidechain, you know, XDAI is a sidechain. Anything that has its own validator set can be a sidechain to Ethereum, like other layer 1 blockchains. But the reality is that like it doesn't really make too much sense, right? Just because they can bridge in doesn't mean they're a sidechain. They don't really have anything to do with Ethereum. They can just bridge into Ethereum. So really they're just standalone things. So I think you're either a layer 2 or you're like a hybrid layer 2 / sidechain maybe, right? Or you could say that you're a hybrid where, you know, you do checkpoint to Ethereum, but you also rely on your own security. You know, it's hard, right? And I think as an ecosystem, we have to kind of like agree on a term because I don't want everyone just calling everything layer 2s. I don't want people calling other blockchains layer 2 to Ethereum because that is not true. And like, it's objectively not true because, you know, Polkadot doesn't inherit any security from Ethereum. It does not checkpoint to Ethereum, but it can bridge in, right? You know, technically, based on the usage of the term that I've been using for a while now, it is a quote-unquote sidechain, I guess you could say. But it's not, you know, that term is just like so bastardized at this point that I just don't want to use it anymore. So from now on, I'm going to try really hard not to use the term sidechain. I'm just going to say if it's a layer 2 or if it's a chain that's bridged into Ethereum or if a chain that is kind of like inheriting Ethereum security because it's checkpointing to it, which I think is the better approach to this. But, you know, I think at the end of the day, you know, the end user shouldn't have to worry about this at all. You know, it's up to us to kind of like worry about it, the people in the weeds and the people building this stuff and educating about this stuff. But, you know, the end users, most of the world is not going to know any of this, right? They're not going to care about it, which I think is fine. But I think it's up to us to make sure that we build things that, you know, aren't like insecure or don't rug pull people, right? Because, you know, I do think users care about decentralization when it matters because they may not come for the decentralization, but they stay for it, right? Because if they come and then they go on a chain or something and then they kind of get like rug pulled or like their funds get stolen or whatever because of the chain security being kind of, I guess, like compromised, then they're going to care, right? They're going to care that it wasn't decentralized. So I think that it's up to us as builders to make sure that we build the most decentralized and secure systems for the end user. So Amazon AWS announced I guess like a new kind of feature on their service on the Amazon Web Services today called General Availability of Ethereum on Amazon Managed Blockchain. Now, the TLDR here, from what I understand, is it's basically a way to spin up the Ethereum blockchain using Amazon's managed blockchain services. So you can spin up like an Ethereum node, essentially. Now, the reason why, you know, you would use this is if you're like, you know, someone who needs infrastructure quickly spun up, you can just spin it up on Amazon here, and it's really easy to communicate with and all that sort of stuff. And they go into kind of like more detail about this here. I think it's cool that Amazon is supporting Ethereum, but at the same time, I don't recommend any home users like me and you know, to run our stuff on cloud providers like AWS. I recommend running your node locally if you can. Run it on your local PC. I mean, right behind me here, I have my staking PC, right? That's where I run my kind of like ETH1 node, my ETH2 node, my ETH2 stakers on that box there, all locally, right? That helps decentralization because we don't want like, you know, all the nodes just living on AWS where a government can just say to Amazon, we want you to shut down like all the kind of Ethereum nodes and then 50% of the nodes go offline or something, right? That's very bad for decentralization. So I strongly recommend not running nodes on, you know, for your own personal use on these kind of cloud providers. I can understand why companies are going to do it, right? Because you know, maintaining infrastructure can be burdensome, can be something that you just want to like delegate to someone else, which is fine. And you know, there's staking companies and infrastructure companies that do this too, and they kind of like use these services. But when you can run your node locally and on your own kind of hardware, it's best to do that. And if you aren't running an ETH1 node today, highly recommend going and doing it. It's not hard. There's lots of guides out there Bankless has some guides. You can just search, Bankless ETH1 node and it'll come up. ETHHub has a guide as well. You can just go to docs.ethhub.io and check it out there. And yeah, it's very simple to get started, and you help to decentralize the network out like that. So I highly recommend doing that. But still good to see, Amazon supporting Ethereum here. I think it just like adds more credibility to the platform, gets more eyeballs on it, acts as maybe a little bit of a marketing machine too, which I thought was pretty cool. So last, a tweet here from jchervinsky from Compound Finance. So the tweet reads, "The entire world becomes much easier to understand when you realize that the economic value of any good or service is simply whatever someone will pay for it." End quote. Now, this is something that I've been grappling with over the past few weeks with people, because they see that in the NFT space in particular, there's a lot of things that are just like going crazy, right? A lot of pieces, whether it be art or whether it be game items or whatever, a lot of NFTs are just selling for crazy amounts. I saw the other day there was like a Beeple kind of piece that sold for like $6.6 million or something, right? And that's not even like a bad offender or anything. Beeple has like a really great reputation and following, and he's been doing art for quite a while now. But there are like, I guess, opportunists coming into this space right now that are minting, these NFTs and making a killing off of them. And people are kind of being like, what the hell? Like, this is all overvalued. This is a bubble. And maybe it is, right? But the point is that it becomes easier to understand why this is happening if you just realize that people are parting with their money on their own, right? They're just like, okay, for whatever reason, they're like, I want to spend the X amount of money on this. And whether they're doing it because they're investing and it turns out to be a bad investment, right? That's the same as any other thing that you'll buy, right? Any other token that you buy. Maybe they're doing it because they really want to support the artist, but maybe the artist never takes off, right? And then they just have something that might be special to them. There's a million different reasons why people buy things. So Jake's point here is that don't worry about why they're doing it, just accept that they are. And I think that's really crucial. But if you are trying to use it as like a top signal or as like a way to see how hot the market is, that can work as well. Because if people are just throwing money at stuff that seems kind of insane to throw money at and it just doesn't make any sense, that could normally, maybe not normally, but sometimes be like a top signal if that's what you're kind of like looking for. But it's really hard because, as I've said, the NFT space is attracting like so many different people right now that signs of like froth are indistinguishable from signs of adoption, I think. And that doesn't just apply to NFTs. I think that applies to the crypto markets in general, where things are very frothy. But are they frothy because of the fact that it's a bubble? Or are they frothy because there's a lot of people coming into the ecosystem now? And maybe that just goes hand in hand. Maybe it's a bubble because a lot of new people are coming in and those people won't stay. But I don't think so. Because as I've explained before, I think a lot of people are going to stay this time because of DeFi. They're going to stay because of NFTs. They're going to stay because they're into governance, right? There's a lot of different use cases that Ethereum now has to keep people here. 2017 had none of this, right? All you were doing in 2017 was speculating on future use cases. So this is why I talk about this cycle being longer, right, as a general kind of crypto cycle, and maybe it being like the last cycle where we don't have like another 2-year bear market or whatever. I don't know for sure if that's going to happen. I actually think it might, but at the end of the day, there's going to be froth wherever you look, and it's going to probably get much more frothy because we still haven't reached anywhere near kind of mainstream adoption. I think crypto is going mainstream, but the adoption of the apps is still nowhere near mainstream because it's just too costly right now. We're going to get there with layer 2 and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, I think just go along for the ride. Don't worry too much about what's happening, how much money people are making or how much money is being spent on stuff. If you're scared that the market's topped out, maybe you need to take some off the table. Not investment advice, but maybe you need to sell some, right? I've had a few friends do this where they were like, I need to just sell, right? Because it's too much stress. I need to just get out of the markets. Not all of it, like, some of their stash, and that's totally fine, right? I mean, I feel it too. Like, I'm always anxious and scared when I see a dump happen. Like, especially the other day when I saw that 30% dump happen, I kind of like thought to myself, I'm like, I believe this isn't the, a new kind of cycle top. I believe that we're not going into a 2-year bear market or whatever again, but you never know. And, as someone who sat through the entire bear market and watching it, every single day and waiting for ETH to just go above, $200 for so long, right? You get scared. And I totally understand that. But if that's you, take some off the table, right? I don't think that you should be like, 100% invested into crypto if you can't be. I mean, I am, right? But I am for my own reasons. I think I should be taking some off the table myself, but I just can't because I'm so bullish. But that's not supposed to be like investment advice or a signal to you. I don't know what's going to happen in the markets. I might be wrong. Maybe we go into another bear market sometime soon. I don't know. But if you're seeing froth, maybe you use that as a signal to kind of take some off the table because you're feeling not too comfortable about it. And that's fine. I don't blame you for that. I don't think anyone should blame anyone for that. Taking profits is healthy. You shouldn't be ashamed. I mean, the reason why most people invest in this stuff is to sell it at a higher price later, right? So why should you be ashamed for selling? Anyway, I've gone on a rant again about that. I think that's it for today's episode because I've gone over time here. So thank you everyone for listening and watching. Be sure to give that video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet, join the Discord server, subscribe to the newsletter, and I'll catch you all tomorrow. Thanks everyone.